My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network of individuals and institutions which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion, or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power?
Chapter 13: The Technocratic State. Up to this point, we have focused our attention on the various individuals and institutions which make up the pyramid of power. As we near the top of the pyramid and edge closer to the looming question, who is on top of the pyramid, we must first stop to examine the philosophy which appears to be guiding the actions of the inner circle. Over the years, researchers of the ruling class have typically fallen into one of three categories: those who believe the guiding philosophy is communism, those who believe it is a fascist ideology driving the psychopaths at the top, and finally, those who see the most danger coming from nationalist authoritarians. Now, it's not hard to see why some would believe the threat is communism, fascism, or even nationalism. History shows us the violence, betrayal, tyranny, murder, and starvation wrought by the Russian Bolshevik Revolution and other communist revolutions inspired by the Bolsheviks. Also, we have seen the violence and death brought by Hitler's Nazis and Mussolini's fascists. And history has also shown us that tyrants will use the cover of traditionalism and national identity to enforce their police state measures, as with the Franco dictatorship in Spain. These historical events are all worthy of further inspection, and we will do so in an upcoming chapter. But for now, it's important to understand that while some researchers fall into this dichotomy of communism versus fascism, there are also those who believe this narrow focus misses the mark when it comes to the actual guiding philosophy of the pyramid of power. If it's not right-wing nationalism or left-wing communism we should fear, what is the actual philosophy that underpins the actions of the ruling class? Understanding historical technocracy. In the early 20th century, a movement began to develop around a political theory known as technocracy, a system wherein management of governments is handled by technical experts, often involving technology-focused solutions. Early proponents of technocracy claimed that the concept would lead to better management of resources and the protection of the planet. However, this system of governance by technological experts and their technology would also involve a loss of privacy, as well as centralization of power and the management of all human behavior. In the early 1930s, as the United States population grappled with the Great Depression, many researchers and philosophers began to look for alternative ways of viewing society. Technocracy was one of those alternatives. The book, Technocracy and the American Dream, describes the beginning of the movement as follows. One of the first plausible alternatives was offered by a group of technicians and social engineers who had organized the Committee on Technocracy at Columbia University. Central to their analysis was the paradox of a society victimized by abundance. Science, engineering, and technology possessed the potential for realizing a material utopia, but, according to the technocrats, America's inefficiency in adjusting to the requirements of modern technology had brought about the Depression. Technology, they argued, required the complete reorientation of production and distribution along scientific and engineering lines. Researcher Patrick Wood is one of the first to take note of the importance of the historic technocracy movement. Wood had partnered with Anthony C. Sutton, the famous British-American economist, professor, and writer. Sutton himself produced numerous books explaining the intersection of powerful people and secret societies. In the late 1970s, Woods and Sutton co-authored 2 volumes of Trilaterals over Washington, focusing on the then new organization, the Trilateral Commission. It was Patrick Wood's studies of the Trilateral Commission which led to his understanding of historical technocracy.
This is a system that was created back in 1930 at Columbia University, the seat of progressivism in America at the time. in the heat of the Great Depression, and a group of engineers and scientists at Columbia decided they could do better and that they would recreate an economic system that would replace capitalism and free market economics. They called it technocracy. It was to be a resource-based system, not a price-based system, where all assets, all resources of the world be controlled by them, the technocrats. It was an interesting movement in that they had no use for politics or political structures whatsoever. At the time, they wanted to have President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do away with the political system, declare himself dictator, and just simply appoint technocrats to run the whole country. And they wanted him to dismiss Congress and all of Congress home. And I mean, it was pretty crazy back in those days.
The most influential proponent of the original technocracy movement was a man named Howard Scott, a writer who founded the Technical Alliance in New York City in 1919. Scott believed that business owners lacked the necessary skills and data to reform their industries, and thus control should be handed over to engineers. In 1913, Scott and fellow technocrat Walter Rautenstrauch formed the Committee on Technocracy at Columbia University. The group would eventually splinter, with Scott leading Technocracy Incorporated and fellow technocrat Harold Loeb in charge of the Continental Committee on Technocracy. Both Rautenstrauch and Loeb split with Scott in part because he was militant about his technocratic beliefs, where the other two men could be seen as more moderate technocrats. Scott began to focus his attention on designing the blueprint for how such a technocratic vision could come to life. Between 1933 and 1936, the first outline of the Technocratic Society came into view in the writings of Scott and in the official Technocracy study course edited and largely written by another technocrat by the name of King Hubbert. Hubbert and Scott assumed the preferred societal framework is a hierarchical organization. However, instead of businessmen, capitalists, or politicians, they believed it would be the engineers and technologists who operated a, quote, permanent, productive, and distributive system which will harness the energy resources of the country for the mutual benefit of the entire population. This self-perpetuating corporate structure, or technate as Scott called his organization, would be divided into functional divisions run by a divisional director. All of these directors would make up the Continental Control Board, would make, quote, whatever decisions pertaining to the whole social mechanism that have to be made. The Control Board would elect one of its members, Continental Director. This technician king would have the responsibility for the smooth functioning of the overall operation. In 1938, Technocracy Incorporated released a publication that further outlined its vision for a technocracy. Quote, technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population of this continent. For the first time in human history, it will be done as a scientific, technical, and engineering problem. There will be no place for politics or politicians, finance or financiers, rackets or racketeers. Technocracy states that the price and abundance are incompatible. The greater the abundance, the smaller the price. In real abundance, there can be no price at all. Only by abandoning the interfering price control and substituting a scientific method of production and distribution can an abundance be achieved. Technocracy will distribute by means of a certificate of distribution available to every citizen from birth to death. The technate will encompass the entire American continent from Panama to the North Pole because the natural resources and the natural boundary of this area make it an independent, self-sustaining geographical unit. The book, Technocracy and the American Dream, provides some fantastic insights into the mind of Scott and the technocratic vision he proposed. One thing that is clear is that the technocrats were materialists at heart, finding little use for philosophy or virtue. Scott and his allies saw humans as mechanistic cogs in a larger machine that simply needed to be bent to the will of the machine in the interest of some alleged collective good. Author William Aiken noted that in the technocrats' technological utopia, machines serve man only when man serves them. Aiken also claimed that the technocrats, quote, would not accept any limitations on the technician's mandate, preferring instead that the, quote, rationality of science and the harmony of the machine, not utopian virtues, would dictate organizational forms. Scott believed that eventually man would come to accept a, quote, reality understood in terms of machine-like function. The reality of the technocratic vision described by Scott is that it would involve a loss of individual choice and liberty. Aiken writes that, quote, under a technocracy, a sizable amount of things deemed good would be given up. For those who desired a new society, the concern for the Commonwealth minimized outdated concepts of individual self-realization, responsibility for oneself, individual conscience, free choice, and self-expression. The whole liberal belief in the dignity and the worth of the individual. There would be no nonsense about individual liberty. He further notes that, quote, certain individual freedoms would be sacrificed to efficiency, and that an individual's job would not be their own choice, but would be, quote, determined by his abilities and the needs of the organization. The technate would decide how goods were produced, where to allocate labor and resources, develop and apply technology, and most of all, assure efficiency. Of course, consumers might have fewer options in the technocrats' marketplace because Scott imagined the technate would restrict many types of goods which involved waste and inefficiency. Aiken writes, quote, for example, since it would increase inefficiency to produce multiple models of automobiles or specially designed housing, these items would have to conform to functional specifications rather than consumer taste.
If you are driving a non-official car, let's give it a new coat of technocracy gray.
Aiken also wrote that the technocrats attempted to combine their faith in positivistic science with a mechanistic view of man and the dominance of technology into a functional ideal that resembled Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Despite the work of Scott and Technocracy Inc., in the 1940s, mainstream interest in the technocracy movement seemed to dissipate. Some researchers attribute this to a lack of a coherent political theory for achieving change, while others say that President Roosevelt and the New Deal provided an alternative solution to financial hardship. Whatever the cause, technocracy ceased to be a topic of mainstream political discourse. However, this was not the end of the technocratic movement. The Technotronic Era. The ideas that underpin the technocratic vision received a notable endorsement in the 1970s with the founding of the Trilateral Commission and the release of the book Between Two Ages: America's Role in the Technotronic Era. The book was written by political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski was actually also involved in the founding of the Trilateral Commission as well. This was the beginning of a resurgence of technocratic thought.
But in the early 1970s, it came back to life again with a vengeance, and then it was picked up by big money people like David Rockefeller and political ideologues like Professor Zbigniew Brzezinski, who also was at Columbia University at the time, by the way. They started a group called the Trilateral Commission, which was, they co-founded it, but they started this group that brought in members from Japan, North America, and Europe to foster what they called at the time a new international economic order. I did not recognize in the 70s what that meant, what new meant. I know that's silly, but I had no frame of reference, didn't understand historic technocracy at the time. But that's what they said, a new international economic order. Well, time went by and I did not understand it for a long time. I figured they're rearranging the deck chairs on the economic Titanic, so to speak, to play for them. But in the early, somewhere around 2006-07, I discovered historic technocracy for the very first time. And I immediately understood that this was the new international economic order that the Trilateral Commission was talking about in the early 1970s.
As Patrick Wood notes, until his death in 2018, Brzezinski was a diplomat who ran in the same circles as David Rockefeller and former Secretary of State and accused war criminal Henry Kissinger. Brzezinski served as advisor to several presidents, from Jimmy Carter to Barack Obama. He was the co-founder of the Trilateral Commission and also a member of the Atlantic Council, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Although Brzezinski's Between the Two Ages substituted the term technotronic for technocratic, the depiction of the future is the same, a world in which the scientific and technological elite centrally plan the lives of all humanity. Essentially, Brzezinski's vision is a technologically advanced, authoritarian-style collectivism wherein individual liberties are subordinated to the apparent needs of the collective. He explains technotronic in the following way. Quote, the post-industrial society is becoming a technotronic society, a society that is shaped culturally, psychologically, socially, and economically by the impact of technology and electronics, particularly in the area of computers and communications. In the Technocratic Society, scientific and technical knowledge, in addition to enhancing production capabilities, quickly spills over to affect almost all aspects of life directly. Accordingly, both the growing capacity for the instant calculation of the most complex interactions and the increasing availability of biochemical means of human control augment the potential scope of consciously chosen direction, and thereby also pressures to direct, to choose, and to change. Brzezinski believes that, quote, persisting social crisis, the emergence of a charismatic personality, and the exploitation of mass media to obtain public confidence would be stepping stones in the piecemeal transformation of the United States into the highly controlled technocratic society. In a moment of honesty, Brzezinski acknowledges that, quote, the fiction of sovereignty is clearly no longer compatible with reality because emerging global consciousness is causing the, quote, abandonment of preoccupations with national supremacy in favor of global interdependence. Brzezinski's vision of the future was not mere speculation or guesswork. He was a member of the ruling class who spent his life using nation-states and the people within them as pawns in a chess game in which most of the players are dangerously oblivious to the reality unfolding around them. I believe that Brzezinski's book describes the world that is unfolding in the 2020s. After receiving the endorsement and promotion of Brzezinski, the technocratic ideals made their way to other international organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum.
So this was picked up and launched and moved forward through the auspices of the United Nations in particular. It became the doctrine of sustainable development, which is now all over the world. It's more recently become things like the phrase "Build Back Better," the Great Reset, or Green New Deal in America. We see all kinds of policies wrapped around it. Typically, the death of fossil fuels, oil, coal, gas, and restrictions on where we could build, where we could go, and stuff like that. All of these things are related to this now in modern day time. This is technocracy today that's taking over. It's not socialism, it's not communism, and it's not fascism per se. There are very significant distinctives with technocracy. China is a technocracy, by the way. You can look at China and get a good idea of what it looks like. You have total micromanagement of the population through technology. You have social credit scoring system that tells people what they can and can't do. And they get punished if they make a wrong move, or they do the wrong thing, or they talk to the wrong person, or whatever. These things were unheard of 30 years ago. Today, they're commonplace, and they're creating a lot of fear in the minds of people. So this is the environment that we find ourselves in today, with this emerging scientific dictatorship that's got a hold of the whole planet. It's not just America. It's not just Democrats and Republicans, so we got to get over that part. It's global in nature today.
The modern technocrats and the technocratic state. Now that we understand a bit of the history of technocracy and some of the ideas that it proposes, we need to examine the world of today, looking for signs of the technocratic influence. Let's start by looking at the wealthiest companies and most influential CEOs. These individuals are running companies that have amassed large amounts of financial wealth, as well as unfathomable amounts of digital data on all of their customers. From Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Bill Gates of Microsoft, Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, Elon Musk of Tesla, and lesser-known names at Google, Apple, and other tech companies. In fact, with his belief in technological solutions as the answer to all of humanity's problems, Elon Musk appears to be walking a path similar to his grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, who was a research director for Technocracy Incorporated of Canada and national chairman of the Social Credit Party. These men and their colleagues in various technological industries wield immense power through their companies, wealth, and cultural influence. These individuals have enough money, resources, and connections to shape elections, geoengineer the climate, censor information, shape international food trends, and cause dips in the stock market. They are the technocrat class of today. But the technocratic world is not complete with the simple presence of technocrats. No, in order to bring about the vision of Scott, there must be mechanisms for understanding all of society's needs and making rational decisions about how to meet those needs. Do we see attempts to create this vision in our current era? As we outlined in our chapter on the foundations, we do indeed see organizations like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations partnering with technocrats to promote technocratic remedies to the various crises facing humanity. For example, we are told that humanity is facing a climate crisis that will require a complete overhaul of our world. The United Nations uses their influence with world governments to push them to align with the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of 17 goals ostensibly focused on fighting climate change, poverty, etc. At the same time, organizations like the World Economic Forum say that COVID-19 presented the perfect opportunity to reset capitalism and all of the world's systems as part of their Great Reset agenda. One of the answers being proposed to stop these apparent crises, specifically climate change, is to geoengineer the weather by spraying various particles out of the back of airplanes in an attempt to reflect sunlight and lower the average temperature on Earth. Technocrats like Bill Gates are using their immense wealth to finance projects like these, completely bypassing governments and giving the people no say in the matter altogether. Additionally, now that a precedent has been set for nations to lock down their populations in the name of fighting a pandemic, we are also seeing proposals for climate lockdowns. As early as September 2020, the term climate lockdown was used by Mariana Mazzucato, chair of the World Health Organization's Council on the Economics of Health for All. She wrote, quote, "Under a climate lockdown, governments would limit private vehicle use, ban consumption of red meat, and impose extreme energy-saving measures, while fossil fuel companies would have to stop drilling. To avoid such a scenario, we must overhaul our economic structures and do capitalism differently." We are also beginning to see proposals for carbon tracking apps which tell a person how much energy they are using. These could eventually become mandatory, preventing citizens who have used too much carbon from driving, taking public transportation, and other daily practices.
Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker.
In an August 2021 article published in the journal Nature Sustainability, researchers argue in favor of personal carbon allowances, or PCAs. They write, quote, "In particular, during the COVID-19 pandemic, restrictions on individuals for the sake of public health and forms of individual accountability and responsibility that were unthinkable only 1 year before have been adopted by millions of people. People may be more prepared to accept the tracking and limitations related to PCAs to achieve a safer climate and the many other benefits associated with addressing the climate crisis." The authors also claim that the public's acceptance of contact tracing apps could lead to, quote, "insights into possible strategies to use apps to track personal carbon allowances." This type of solution and the entire response to COVID-19 illustrate the level of technocratic thinking that now pervades most governments and world bodies such as the World Health Organization. Both the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the World Economic Forum's Great Reset claim that the answer to our problems will be found in a complete digital transformation of our world, which they claim will be better for the environment, improve efficiency, and be more equitable for all people. Klaus Schwab, founder and director of the World Economic Forum, called this transformation the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is Schwab's pet project and the name of his 2016 book, where he calls for a world with ubiquitous digital surveillance, driverless vehicles, smart cities, social credit scores, the metaverse, and augmented reality. The World Economic Forum describes the Fourth Industrial Revolution as follows, quote, "The first industrial revolution used water and steam power to mechanize production. The second used electric power to create mass production. The third used electronics and information technology to automate production. Now a fourth industrial revolution is building on the third, the digital revolution that has been occurring since the middle of the last century. It is characterized by a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres." To put it simply, the Fourth Industrial Revolution is the digital panopticon of the future, where surveillance is omnipresent and humanity uses technology to alter our lives. Often associated with terms like the Internet of Things, the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Humans, and the Internet of Senses, this world will be powered by 5G and 6G technology. Of course, for Schwab and other globalists, the Fourth Industrial Revolution also lends itself towards more central planning and top-down control, just like the technocratic vision of Howard Scott. The goal is a track and trace society where all transactions are logged, every person has a digital ID that can be tracked, and social malcontents are locked out of society via social credit scores. Similar to Klaus Schwab's Fourth Industrial Revolution, the original technocrats claimed that, quote, electronic devices would immediately tabulate data on the amount of spending and the type of consumption, with this information clearing continuously to the central headquarters. Both Scott and Schwab imagined using technology to know everything about everyone in society in the name of building a system that promised to deliver abundance to all people. According to Scott, with the technician king and control board at the head of the technate, they would control, quote, precise information at all times on the state of consumption of every kind of commodity or service in all parts of the country. And it would be possible for the, quote, technical elite to know precisely what the proper decisions were at all times in order to maintain the operation of the social mechanism at the highest possible load factor and efficiency. This technocratic vision is dependent on the use of surveillance tools like facial recognition, voice detection, 24/7 closed-circuit TV cameras, artificial intelligence, algorithmic manipulation, cell phone tracking, social media monitoring, location tracking, digital eavesdropping via smart devices, and the overall push towards a smart grid. Of course, these technologies are not promoted as surveillance tools, but rather as tools for safety, convenience, education, and profit. However, the result is the same. Individuals and companies promoting technological solutions to the world's ills, resulting in a loss of individual freedoms and more centralized control. Whether by design or accident of history, the modern technocrats, backed by their friends in venture capital firms, the obedient hacks in corporate media, and their partners in government, are becoming what Howard Scott called the technate, and what I call the technocratic state. Is there any way we can stop or avoid the growth of this tyrannical vision? Solutions: opting out of the technocratic state. It's much easier to identify the dangers that lie ahead than it is to provide practical solutions that work for a broad spectrum of people. Inevitably, prescriptions for alternative paths will not apply to all people in all situations. With that said, there are indeed opportunities for potentially preventing the rise of technocracy. As we have noted in previous chapters, one of the most important steps we can take as individuals is to educate those closest to us. In this case, we can educate them about the history of technocracy and the dangers it poses for our future. This could involve sharing this documentary, printing out flyers with relevant info and passing them out at local events, and/or protesting the corporations who are investing in technocratic methods and technologies. Cracking through the veil of ignorance to reach the masses is absolutely necessary if we are to overcome the threat.
Who are these global players that are trying to conquer the whole planet at the same time? That's the big question that we need to answer. And also, if we figure that out, I think we have, but if we figure that out, then we need to figure out what we're going to do about it. Because if we do nothing, not only is silence compliance, but they will win with their new international economic order, their sustainable development, their Green New Deal, their Great Reset, whatever you want to call it. They will win and we will lose.
Patrick Wood also believes the answer lies in critical thinking.
Number one, we need to learn how to interpret propaganda. The world is awash with propaganda. It's being controlled and manipulated by propaganda. And propaganda is a very specific type of misuse of language all around the world. It's intended to deceive the hearer, the reader, the listener. And propaganda is very deadly as far as the mind is concerned because it leads you off into believing things that simply are not true. We see propaganda on all kinds of topics, not just one topic. It's not just on, for instance, global warming or just about the pandemic and vaccines and this, that, things like that. The propaganda in the world today is just about every conceivable topic you can imagine. We need to learn how to see through propaganda, how to recognize it when we're presented with it. But the markers of propaganda are very clear, and they're not difficult to understand. The first part of what the solution is to realize when you're being lied to and to reject whatever it is they're trying to shove down your throat. I tell people routinely, don't comply. Now, I have to qualify that. When you feel like you're being given a role to play that is unnatural in some way, don't do it. Just don't play that role. Be an outlier. Just don't Don't cooperate. Don't participate with it. Now, if you're forced to, that's another issue. But you just can't submit and play the role that they want you to play in this society.
Ultimately, we choose if we want to adopt this digital dystopia. We don't have to accept every new upgrade or device. It's up to us to choose our principles over convenience.
Now, there's lots of things you can do. We know, for instance, Google's a problem. Okay, don't use Google. There are other alternative search engines that you can use. They may not be as convenient. They may not be as nicely programmed, but don't worry about it. Go use something else. Don't comply with Google. They'll suck every bit of data out of you they can. They won't pay you anything for it, and they'll turn around and use it against you in some way. They'll sell it, of course, to the highest bidder, but they'll use it against you ultimately. Don't participate. When you see that they've got a role for you, don't do it. There's lots of other things. We could talk about things like cell phones. This is going to be an issue at some point, smartphones, because all of the smartphone providers are collecting data. They're turning these around as instruments of control, and we're going to have to deal with that issue at some point. Are we going to continue with smartphones, or are we going to figure out other ways to get around these behemoths? There's alternative solutions coming on.
Mr. Wood is correct to question the assumption that humanity needs digital technology integrated into every aspect of our lives. While I wholeheartedly endorse and support the use of digital technology, we must acknowledge that this drive towards a digital world can only happen if we participate. Silent opposition and complaining on the internet are not enough. We must begin to lay the foundation for alternative parallel systems in the event that we cannot prevent the rise of the technocratic state. If you know for certain you don't want to participate in the digital ID initiatives or the digital wallet and central bank digital currencies, what is your alternative plan? Will you comply if your workplace adopts all digital forms of payment? Or if your bank allows you to withdraw funds only with your digital ID? Do you have a way to continue making money for yourself and family in these situations? We need to be honest with ourselves and think about what our red lines, our lines in the sand are. When is enough enough? The answer to that question will depend on your needs, resources, and community. We must build relationships with like-minded people in our local areas as soon as possible. The sooner we establish these relationships and begin growing our own food, exploring alternative physical and cryptocurrencies, creating homeschooling co-ops, and getting off big tech tools, the sooner we will see the creation of a network of communities which operate in a completely alternative, parallel economy with parallel institutions competing with the technocratic ones. One of the best ways to further the creation of this network is by joining the Freedom Cell network at freedomcells.org. Using the website maps, you can search to find individuals and groups in your area who are also looking for like-minded people. Once you make connections, begin meeting in the real world to establish real-world relationships. As a group, begin to set goals focused on getting off the mainstream control grids. The Freedom Cell Network, along with similar organizations, are helping to lay the foundation for the parallel systems of the future. In short, we must begin to exit from these slavery systems and build the foundation of the world we know is possible. To learn more about the history of technocracy, we recommend reading the following: Technocracy and the American Dream by William Aiken, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation, and Technocracy, the Hard Road to World Order by Patrick Wood. For a deeper look at solutions for fighting the technocratic state, read How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State by Derrick Broze.